Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Rose and I create sewing content, and this week we are actually taking a pattern that is from, I believe, Simplicity. I've made it previously, but I'm adding a little bit of a pattern hack this time. And I have some lace fabric from the secondhand store that was actually a curtain, and I think it's the perfect weight for what I'm going for. So it's this shirt. I think I'll make it about hip level. It's nice and billowy and fresh. And I have also made a pair of shorts previously already, and I think they're going to go really well together. So let's start sewing and let's get the pattern actually out, and I actually have to start cutting everything. So let's get to it.
So our first step here is just to cut out the pattern. I am going along with the lace and using the scalloped edge on the hem as the finished hem edge. So I just want to make sure that I'm getting as many flowers as I possibly can and keeping the length that I'd like on the top. After all the pieces are cut out, I'm just going in and French seaming all of the things. What you end up doing is sewing the wrong sides together and then cutting the seam allowance down and then adding the seam on the opposite side. So I end up French seaming the shoulder seams, the side seams, the sleeve, and the sleeve cuff. And this is just a process that I really enjoy doing so that all of the insides are nice and clean. And yes, this does take some additional time, but I don't have a cover lock yet. But French seaming has always been my favorite. Our next step here is just to add the sleeve to the shoulder seam, and what I ended up doing here is adding the wrong sides together, sewing, reducing the seam allowance, and sewing then the right sides together for that little French seam. And just to prevent some of the seams around the neckline to not overstretch, I'm just adding a basting stitch all around the neckline and the front opening. The next step I'm doing here is just adding the basting stitch along the sleeve opening, so then I can add my cuff. And then here I'm just adding the cuff with our French seaming and then adding all the pins. So like suring all of the stitching around so that it fits into the cuff, and then sewing one piece down, and then I flip the seam allowance underneath, and on the inside I am just adding my slip stitch here just to have a really neat hem finishing. The pattern itself obviously goes and says do this on the machine, but if you're new here, I really love hand sewing. It's very calming, and I also find it just so much neater just to do by hand than to take it off to the machine, because I can have just a little bit more control and a little bit more neatness and make sure everything just looks really tidy. So that's just why I love hand sewing here.
Okay, so I'm really loving this. This is it. Well, also just keep in mind, I have like a nude bra on right now, but I'm gonna change and make this little bralette as well, like a white bralette to wear underneath this. But I think the sleeves, so I just did one side, the sleeves look really nice. I love the how much volume it is. And I'm also contemplating doing the neckline a little different. Instead of doing like traditional buttonholes, I might do like the little thing in the center where it's kind of like a loop, and then the button on the other side. So I'm just thinking about how that would be constructed. Otherwise, I love how this is turning out, and I'm gonna create the same steps on this side. So whatever I did here, I just do here, and then yeah, and this guy is almost done.
So next we are adding the collar, or we're just sewing the collar. So with the right sides together, I sew just the bottom opening, and then I trim down all of the seam allowance. So I don't think this is necessarily in the pattern, but I also really like to add like a top stitching, and I added 1/8 of an inch away and then a 1/4 of an inch away from that. And then also I make sure that all of the edges are really trimmed down, so all of the seam allowance is really clipped so that it flips really nicely, and especially the edges, those are, I make sure to really clip down to the edge so that it has a really nice point when we flip it inside out. So next up is adding all of the placket details. So I sew both the inside and outside of the placket together at the shoulder seams. So all the pieces are now together. And what I ended up doing is doing a basting stitch on the outside edge or the inside edge, I believe. And then I'm trimming, clipping down to that edge on the back neckline so that it lays nice and flat in place. I think this helped a lot in this process because before, when I hadn't had it, it wasn't laying so well. And after I trimmed down to the seam, it laid way flatter and it really fit the entire seam. So also in my top, I ended up shortening the placket length because this was originally a romper and now I made it a shirt. So I just had to make those adjustments as well. After I pin the outer placket, so the outside placket to the neckline, I am sewing this all in place and I am trimming everything down. The next step is to add the collar because the collar gets sandwiched in between the outer layer and the inner collar, the outer and inner collar. So I baste that in place and then add the outer collar with the basting on the inside portion of the placket. So when everything gets sewn together, it's all really neat, and this turned out much better than my first version, which I'm very excited about. So after I baste the collar into place, I'm adding the inside placket point. I go in and I believe actually I added the the basting stitch along the outer and inner portion of the inside placket. What this helps to do is really offer a guideline of where your seams will be. So I was able to clip down and give little clips down to the placement below behind the back neckline, which was really important. This helped everything lay nice and flat and all the seams to match up. And then after this was complete, I was able to flip the collar inside as it should be laying, and I was able to trim it down and really clip all the way to that basting edge and flip all the seam allowance underneath. So naturally what I end up doing is I pin all of that in place and I hand sew everything just for that little final beautiful touch. Our next step here is to finish the placket at the bottom edge. So what I end up doing is making sure, I believe I had the right placket, which would have the buttonholes over the left part of the placket, and then I sew it into place at the base and make sure to catch the actual shirt itself so it's nice and finished. And then naturally I just like to add an additional little X. This is also in our pattern directions, but it says to do it on your machine, and I did this by hand just because, you know, I love the stitch. Let me know below if you also enjoy hand sewing. I would love to hear what you guys think. And the last and final step here is just to add the buttonholes. So I was able to do that. I think I just removed one buttonhole overall in the total length because this was shortened from the romper to this top. And I hope you guys really enjoyed watching this. Let me know if you have any comments or questions below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you love this little outro. I was able to take some beautiful photos by the hideout, which is behind my house. It's a nature reserve, and in August it lights up in the most beautiful purple flowers. It's the only time of year where we get this, and I just kind of had to take advantage, and I went for our sunrise. So thank you again, and please like and subscribe. It was so wonderful having you here. See you next week. Bye.